Okay. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome.
We are not starting in a few minutes. We are starting right now.
Woo!
Okay, so first, an introduction. This is usually an Italian-only retro gaming channel. We stream all kinds of retro gaming stuff with a lot of love. We usually use real hardware, but this time we're organizing a talk show, and our guest is David Fox. So we thought to do the stream directly in English, since we will have to translate otherwise. And so this stream is all in English, and we will have the pleasure and the honor to have David Fox. David Fox, employee number 3 of Lucasfilm Games and LucasArts, and author of games like Zack McCracken, Indiana Jones 3 and The Lost Crusade, Rescue on Fractalus, and recently Thimbleweed Park. So, my name is Kenobit, his name is Bizboch, as you can see right here, and let's say we are about to call David Fox.
Because he is not David Fox.
He is not David Fox.
No.
Not David Fox, he is our friend Gianluca.
Hi.
He is our live audience tonight. So let's call David Fox and let's see what happens.
He says, I'm here, so he's here. Well, there. Ooh, that's me.
Let's see.
I hear the
Let's see.
Skype vibes.
La persona chiamata lascia un messaggio dopo il beep.
So we are on voicemail. Okay, this might happen when we are live, but we will just wait for David a little more. Andrea, his name is Bizboch, but he's also Andrea.
Yes.
Is there anything you want to say about this night? It's our first time streaming in English.
Yes, it's the first night streaming in English, and I'm excited. I'm really excited because I'm old, as you can see. And that's why, for me, the opus of David Fox is really, really, really incredible, and it has a big place in my heart. And I work as a game developer, so it's even more exciting to talk with him.
Oh, yes. Let's see. Hi, David.
Hey,
Hello.
hi guys.
Okay, we are live with David Fox, Mr. David Fox. David, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I am really, really happy to do this. Me and David got to know each other because we worked together on Thimbleweed Park. I was just an humble translator, but I got to work with him and Ron Gilbert on Thimbleweed Park. And we got to know each other, and since he is the author of Zack McCracken, Indiana Jones 3 and many games I loved, we tried to invite him on stream for a few times. This time it's just a talk show. We will not be playing any game. We'll have videos and photos and some really cool LucasArts, Lucasfilm surprises. But so right now we will be just interviewing and chatting with David. So David, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Okay, so I would like to. The first question I want to ask is about the Marine Computer Center, the thing that started it all. Would you like to tell us what the Marine Computer Center was?
Sure. So back in around, say, mid-1970s, 1975, 1976, I had just, I was actually doing counseling with people, and I was getting kind of frustrated with it. I felt like I wanted to reach more people than I could by just having some single sessions, maybe with a dozen people during a week. And started thinking, I wonder if there's, this is around the time that microcomputers were just starting to come out. There were no really maybe a couple of gaming systems, pretty poor though. I was wondering whether there might be a way to do video games and have them actually help people in some way. Learn more about yourself by playing games. So you could do a game theoretically, maybe you play through and something new about some lessons would be learned. And since I had no real background in computers or computer science, I started off in engineering at college and ended up in humanistic psychology. So, neither of them quite really gave me the background. There were no courses in game design. My wife Annie and I decided to open a public access microcomputer center in Marin County, which is where we lived. And we registered as a nonprofit organization. We got a loan from a friend for $50,000 at the time and ended up purchasing 10 microcomputers to start and open the doors. We got a space that used to be as part of a school. It's a school library. It's a gorgeous space, like 5,000 square feet. We're paying maybe 10 cents a square foot. It's like really inexpensive. And we started teaching kids and adults programming in BASIC, and we did field trips, and kids would come in for birthday parties, and they play games on the computers we had. And over the years, we ended up getting more computers, and I think got some grants, and ended up with in the 40s, maybe, including Apple IIs and Atari 800s and 400s, and Radio Shack computer, and a Commodore 60, not a Commodore 64. I think this is before Commodore 64. So a Commodore PET, and and a friend of mine had an Apple I computer we had on display. It's like one of the very rare ones. I think he had it in a suitcase, and it was just a great place. We had a projection TV screen, so people would play Star Raiders on it on Atari because it was it was the most immersive game we had. And that's how I started in games. We ended up getting donations of a bunch of games from different companies, and then we would review these games for Creative Computing magazine. And so I got to start doing conversions. So I got to meet Scott Adams, who is the guy who did Adventure International. And he wrote his games for the Radio Shack computer, for the TRS-80, and gave them to us, gave me the source code. I converted them to Apple II and for CP/M systems. A friend of mine, young guy who worked with us, I didn't know assembly language at the time, so he wrote some extensions for Apple's BASIC, for AppleSoft, to give it some of the functionality that Radio Shack TRS-80 BASIC had that Apple BASIC didn't have, like if then else, and some string search capabilities and things like that. So I could essentially duplicate the code that Scott had done in his adventure games, his text adventures. And so we had but that was my education, by looking at his games and other people's games that we got to, like that. I really learned a lot about game design and what worked and what didn't work. And that was me being self-taught at the feet of other game designers, essentially, at the time.
But how much was a single microcomputer when you started the center?
I think
in terms of money.
Interestingly, it was, in terms of the number of dollars, it's very similar to what it is today. But if you take inflation into effect, it's way more. So I think we paid maybe in the range of $1,200 to $1,400 for the 10 computers. It's in dollars. I think we got it because we were getting a quantity, and we made a deal with the local Byte Shop or computer store where they actually bought the computers and assembled them for us as kits. And so we got a big discount. They probably were closer to $2,000. I think Apple IIs were in the same range, $1,800 to $2,000 maybe. When we were trying to decide what computer to use, I was looking at the processor technology SOL 20, which is what we ended up with. or the Apple II, which had just been announced. And I did this field trip to Apple headquarters, which was a small office space in South Bay, I think in Cupertino. And when I walked in, there were a bunch of desks, and on top of the desks were piled this high, a stack of these cases of Apple II computers. And there's these two guys there with beards and dark hair and long hair who were demoing the computers to me. And both of their names were Steve. and it didn't hit me till later after they became known who was trying to convince me to get these computers. And the reason we didn't go with the Apple II is primarily because it didn't do upper and lower case. It was an uppercase only computer when it first came out. And I thought we would be doing a lot of or that our customers or members would do a lot of word processing, which didn't turn out to be the case. There was some, but not that much. And we probably would have been better served to have the Apple IIs, the color and the sound. And, I think they had floppy disks a lot sooner than other ones. And BASIC was in ROM. So with the processor technology computer, we had to walk around with cassette recorders. Every time we did a class, we'd have to load BASIC in via audio cassettes into the computers. And if someone walked up to the computer with static electricity and touched the computer, it would blow the memory and reset. So it was pretty clunky back then. But
how big or how small was the scene back then? The microcomputing scene, because it was basically a hobby thing in the very beginning.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine, Mitch Waite, who had written a bunch of books on computers at the time, was the one who kind of introduced me to the Homebrew Computer Club, which was the big computer club that had been meeting for several years down at Stanford. And I remember going to one meeting there with him, and people were presenting. I think Lee Felsenstein, who was the designer of the Sol 20 that we ended up with, was the president, but they were speaking some language that I didn't understand. It was English, but half the words were totally foreign to me, and it was just very bizarre to hear them going on, everyone talking, and I couldn't really follow any of what they were saying. I just had to kind of try to listen. And I ended up meeting Lee, and he showed me his new computer. And one of the reasons he chose it was full keyboard. It had really nice walnut sides. So Annie really liked it because it looked friendly. And something you could have in your home. It looked more like a typewriter with walnut trim and a nice blue top. So I think that was. There was a scene. There was a local computer store. People were selling computers. We never sold computers. We were just educational. So we sold magazines, and we had members. People get a membership for, I don't know, $20, $30 a year or something. They would give them a discount off of the rental time on the computers to like $1.50 an hour, and maybe more if they wanted to have a printer computer or one with a floppy disk. And it was good. So we were doing that for about 4 years. And during that time, I co-wrote a book with Mitch called Pascal Primer. Annie wrote a book, and I worked with her on that a little bit, called Armchair Basic, which did really well. And then I did the Computer Animation Primer. And that was the one that I think was my entree to Lucas. Lucasfilm happened to be located in the same county that we were in Marin County, and that we would cross paths. And we opened the center the same year that Star Wars came out, like 6 months later. So I was very aware of the movie. They actually, I think George or someone, maybe it was his producer, Gary Kurtz, borrowed or rented our video equipment for a shoot for a fundraiser to show little kids dressed up as Jawas? Were they called the low sand creature characters that were in the first movie? Jawas.
Jawas.
Jawas, yeah.
Italian.
So
This might be Italian, but yeah, Jawas.
It was Jawa. So there was kind of this interconnectivity on the periphery that we knew about them, and there's actually a point in 1979 or 80 where Annie and I were thinking of leaving the Bay Area and trying to find a place where we could actually afford to buy a house. And we traveled up to Oregon, or looking at Eugene, Oregon, and the prices were maybe a third of what they were in the Bay Area. And I had this thought, so if we move up here, I'll never get to work at Lucasfilm. And I said that to Annie, and she said, "Well, yeah, that's true." So we decided not to move, and that was a couple years, 3 years before I ended up working there. So that was always kind of a dream idea. And when I was working on Computer Animation Primer, which was half the part I wrote was about using the Atari 800 for animation and how to do it, and the other half was Mitch wrote a lot of it. It was more about computer graphics in general, and also a lot about high-end graphics. And during my research, I got to contact a bunch of film production or companies that were doing early work on computer graphics. And Lucasfilm Computer Division had just started a year or so before that. And I got to call them up, and they invited me over. And I got a tour and got to meet the people there, and they showed me the work they were doing, and they gave me a bunch of photos of, say a demo thing they did called Point Reyes, and also some stills from Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, showing the Genesis effect, which they were still in production on. And I met Lauren Carpenter, who let me have his footage for Volibre, which was his earlier, before he got to Lucas. That was his entree to Lucas, was his CG flight through a fractal landscape. And in the book itself, if you flip the pages, in the corners of all the pages, there are these frames that you actually can use it like a flip book and see animation of these movies. So I met these people like a year before, and during the research period, and that was in '81. And then a member of our computer center, and Gary Leo, was someone who worked at Industrial Light and Magic, and he did a lot of work on their Go Motion system. And if you remember, there was a movie called Dragon Slayer, yes. And they had a really nicely done stop motion dragon. Yeah. And what had been done up to this point for stop motion is you move the dragon, take a picture, move the dragon, take a picture, move the dragon, take a picture. And the problem was that you'd end up with this very jittery kind of effect because you were filming static frames or static positions. So what he did was he would program with an Apple II, he programmed the dragon to move and would take it while it was in motion. So instead of, if you knew if the dragon had to move from this position to this position, he would snap the picture during the motion transition between the pictures and get a little bit of motion blur. And that motion blur from the moving of the dragon created a much smoother look of its motion.
This is wonderful.
Yes, we all saw that movie because of the dragon, basically, at
yes.
the time. So it's amazing.
Yeah, right. And do you know who the director of that movie was?
No.
Or the writer? Was the writer or director? Hal Barwood worked on that movie. He was a filmmaker before he started working in games. So anyway, Gary told me that he heard that there was a new group starting up at Lucas to do games. and this was maybe May or June of 1982. And so I quickly called up the head of the computer division, which was Ed Catmull, and said, I'd love to talk to you guys about this. And he said, oh yeah, well, we just hired our manager, Peter Langston. He'll start in a few weeks, and I'll tell him to talk to you when he comes. So I had just finished the manuscript of Computer Animation Primer. Coincidentally, Atari was in partnership with Lucasfilm. They provided the seed money to start up the games group. So we knew that the games would be done on Atari computers. And here's my book on Atari computers and animation. And I brought the manuscript in and showed to Peter, and he wasn't quite ready to start hiring people yet, but I ended up becoming the first outside person besides him. There was a guy who came over from the computer division into our group who had been doing work on laser film printing, a guy named Rob Poor. So he was number 2, and I was the number 3 after Peter.
Whoa.
And it took about, I started in early September, so it took maybe 3 or 4 months to get the yes and get the start date. And I remember when he finally called on the phone, I was just like jumping around afterwards and realized I never asked him anything about salary or benefits.
Yes.
Who cares, you know?
Yes.
How much do I have to pay?
That was a dream job.
It was, yeah. And it wasn't just a dream job then. It was something I had been thinking about since I saw Star Wars.
Yes.
I wanted to be in the movie somehow, and I knew I wasn't an actor. I didn't have the training to do special effects, and I just thought that it was pretty much hopeless. But when I heard they were going to do games, I could do this.
Well, you're one of the very few that saw Star Wars. Everybody said, I want to be in there somehow, but you actually got in there somehow.
I got in there somehow. So, and when I look back at the chain of events, it's almost like I had pre-knowledge of a bunch of things, like that we should end up in Marin County, that we should do something with computers, that I should do a book on computer animation and connect with these people, and all these things were, and that we should do the Atari 800 book. All these things were like a perfect lineup to end up with that position. Also, Peter Langston was looking for people who didn't have deep experience in the computer game industry of the time. He really wanted people who were fresh and hadn't been indoctrinated on various ways on how to do games, and he had ideas that we could do things differently than how it had been done in the past. So the idea that I had not worked for, say, Atari or one of the other companies was a plus instead of a minus, which you would think it would be. So
for
long answer to your question about the computer center.
Yes, that was an amazing answer. David, there's more than 400 people here right now. So if you just tuned in, my name is Kenobit, his name is Bizboch, is Gianluca, and our guest for tonight is David Fox, the man who signed games like Zack McCracken, Indiana Jones 3, but also has been the employee number 3 of Lucasfilm Games and LucasArts. So we are very lucky to have him here tonight. So Andrea, is there anything you want to ask to David?
You talked about Vol Libre, the CG movie with the fractal technology, which has been studied. I work as a video game developer, and all our animators and people studied it because it's like a landmark. But when I think to Rescue on Fractalus, which is a game made in real-time fractal technology, it freaks me out because, I played at the time, it was totally different. It was really a game changer for me. It was like so many layers of technology and emotion in the game. But my question is, how did you have the courage of doing real-time fractal graphics on an Atari or on a Commodore? For me, it was, wow, incredible.
Yeah, well, I can take partial credit for that. I told you I met Lauren Carpenter a year earlier, so we actually got to be kind of friendly and I was quizzing him about computers and where he thought home computers would end up, like how long before we had 24-bit color, which seemed like like eons from then. At the time, if you remember, Atari 800s could do generally 4 colors at a time in most modes, and then in one mode you could do I think it was 16 or 8 colors of one shade, or just very, very limiting. We ended up as office mates for maybe 3 months. They didn't have our space ready yet for the games group, so I ended up moving into his office. And one of the very first things I remember asking when I was in his office was, hey, Lauren, what do you think? Is it possible to do real-time fractals on an Atari 800? And
why not?
And yeah, why not? I asked him, and he laughed at me, and he said, "No way." And then he said, then I guess I got something burbling in his head, and he came back shortly after. So, well, maybe it's possible.
Wow.
He started thinking about it. So we loaned him an Atari 800 to take home, and gave him the manual, and he ended up teaching himself about assembly language programming on the 6502, about the graphics system on the Atari 800, and literally, I think it was 2 or 3 days later, he came back with a real-time landscape that you could. It wasn't quite. It was kind of flying through, but he actually got it to. It's like a wrap-around landscape, and you could just move around it. It wasn't flying, so it wasn't flight dynamics, but it was push forward, push left, push right, like that. And it was cool. The frame rate was decent. It was maybe 6 or 7 frames per second, and it was. It was okay. We could do it. This is the basis of a game. So I designed the game based on knowing that we had that tech available. And he got loaned to our project for several months to refine his code and optimize it. And we hired a guy named Charlie Kellner, who I actually had known from my computer center days. Charlie, I think, was employee number 7 at Apple. And, and he is still, but he's still alive. But he was a brilliant 6502 coder. He knew everything there was to know about optimizing 6502 code. But he was also able to do the flight. He did the flight dynamics, so basically acceleration, and so the thing flew like a plane, more or less. And he did the animation routines, the cell animation routines. I think he did the sound routines, so you could end up with virtual sound channels, so that you could trigger a bunch of different sounds, and it would tell which are the loud ones to keep playing, and maybe turn off other ones in the background until the loud ones stopped. So you felt like you had a lot more channels of sound available than you really did. And he.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, yeah,
Go on.
And he had this, these crazy ideas to, very subtle things like he had noticed physiologically that when you see a bright flash, that your iris, your pupil closes down to shut out some of the light. So that means that even though the bright flash is there, everything else in the room goes dark for an instant, goes darker because your iris is closing down. So he wanted to simulate that effect in Rescue, and every time there was a hit on the ship or with a laser blast, he would have the bright laser and he would darken the background a little bit just for a frame. And it's subtle, you don't really notice it, but I think it kind of made it pop, made it feel like the laser was brighter than it actually was because it was matching that physiological effect. I don't know if it actually worked because the frame rate wasn't slow, but it was a really cool idea. So he was key on the team. Then Gary Winnick was hired as a consultant or contractor initially to do the animation of the Jaggy pop-up and the running character, and he ended up becoming on as a full-time employee soon after that. And then Peter Langston jumped in and did a lot of the music and helped with the sound effects. He would kind of create a sound on, I think it was a Yamaha DX7 keyboard, and he would then ship it over to Charlie, and Charlie would try to duplicate that on the Atari using Atari's capabilities. And so that was pretty much the core team for this, with me doing mostly the gameplay related coding and Charlie doing all the Charlie and Lauren doing all the hard stuff. So, I didn't have to touch the fractal code or any of the flight dynamics. That's not my area. Okay. But I did like the transition scenes and the timing and the tuning and so the launch sequence, which came directly out of my animation book. If you look at that, there's a thing with it going through a Star Wars trench. It's using color cycling, so I use that for the launch. And then kind of basically coming up with, I did the display, the instrument panel. Actually got to look at a real X-wing, like the one that you used for the movie, and got photos of that and tried to use that as inspiration for my my display, which you see it. I see it showing up on your screen now. Yeah. Really different than how it looked in real life. Although in real life it didn't look that great either, because a lot of things are just glued on, old toys and calculators and weird things that you wouldn't really expect to see in an X-wing. And that's how the game got put together. So,
is it true that the fighting part in Fractalus was part of the influence by George Lucas?
Yeah. So I was still was more or less a hippie in terms of my point of view. I didn't want to do violent games, but I did want to do fly through shooting games. So I said, okay, what if we don't actually have a gun? In the idea that the gun had been stripped away to create more space to rescue pilots, and the way that you fight the enemy was get them to chase you, and you go through these really narrow canyons and have them, you do a sharp turn and they're stupid, so they run into the canyon and they blow up. And that was my idea. We don't think we actually implemented that, but that was the idea. So I showed, this would have been sometime in the summer of '83. George came by for the first time to check out our first two games, so Rescue and Ballblazer. And we each got about 20 minutes of his time where he sat down with us and played the game. And he said, he's pushing the joystick button, the red button, and nothing's happening. And he says, where's the fire button? I said, well, there is no fire button. You're supposed to, and describe what the plan was. And he says, was that a gameplay decision or a personal values position? And I said, well, really wasn't gameplay. It was more my point of view. And he said, I want a fire button. So we added that so you could shoot. And the other thing he came up with, and we already had the rescuing pilots, but he said, well, what if every once in a while the pilot isn't a pilot, it's really one of the monsters? And so that was his idea. And we figured out how could we do that so it was dramatic, do a pop-up. I knew that was going to take up a lot of the storage, where the game had to fit into 16K of ROM. And but we managed to squeeze things in and did the pop-up. So that's when we got Gary to do the Jaggy Monster pop-up.
Well, and that was very, very, very impressive. And it's actually one of the iconic screenshots of the Atari.
Yeah,
right.
it's funny because in Europe our computers were a little bit slower in terms of frame rate, and the whole game was slower. So we ran it at the Commodore 64, for example, went at 50 FPS rather than 60. So when I played in recent times the American version, the suspense of that moment where you wait for the knock of the pilot was much slower in the European version, and was almost better because you really were waiting for, okay, is this a good guy or not? And it's a defining moment. But to me, the real defining moment was the moment you entered the atmosphere, and you just expected to see everything brown or everything like, I don't know, Star Raiders kind of landscape, and no, there was this fractal world, and it was there and moving. It was like boo.
And you know what? Fractalus and Ball Blazer were actually my favorite bits of old-time trivia in Thimbleweed Park. You recently worked on Thimbleweed Park with Gary Winnick, Ron Gilbert, and Jen Sandercock. And actually I got to translate the game in Italian, so I got to find all of the quotes in the game, and my favorite was this one. Let me just call it, and this is the Italian page of the Mucas Flam artwork, and there were two games by this Mucas Flam. And one was behind three lines of A's, and that was Ball Blazer, and Fractalus was behind Jaggy Lines.
Yes.
And I really liked that. I really chuckled on my own when I was translating that, because it was really interesting. And these are actually Jaggy Lines.
Yes, but the Jaggy Lines thing, I guess, was an intended joke about.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that was actually a working title at one point that Peter came up with. And it was there was double, obviously a double pun. The name of the Jaggies, they were named Jaggies because at the same time the computer division, the computer division was making great strides and coming up with ways to do anti-aliasing. And how, if you have the color space, how do you use additional color and shades to take a jagged line and make it look straighter by adding colors in their intermediate colors. As you can see on the Atari, we didn't have the color space to do that. We tried it just looked crazy. And the pixels were too big. So as kind of thumbing our nose at the computer division, we decided to call our monsters Jaggies, because that was the enemy of the rest of the computer division. Jaggies are what we would call the opposite of an anti-alias line. It's a jaggy line or jagged line. And the fact that you're looking through these two struts that are jagged, and the monsters are called Jaggies, then behind jaggy lines is a pun, and because you're behind the enemy lines and you're behind lines of jagged pixels. So that was kind of fun. But the marketing department thought that was too obscure. No one would get it. So we ended up with, I think it was called Rescue Mission at one point, and then Rescue on Fractalus.
That's a badass title.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think that was a hard title for people to remember, though, unfortunately, the Fractalus one. But yeah, so be it. That was Atari's marketing that signed off.
Yes, I don't know how much wide known was the concept of fractal in gamers at the time. I think it was quite obscure.
I think just everybody who read Neuromancer by William Gibson had an idea of fractal landscapes and might have looked into it, but there were no internet back in the day, so that might have been hard.
Yeah.
So let's. Oh yeah. Go on.
I was trying to think if there was something else to say about Rescue. I was want to comment on the frame rate thing. On the Atari, it's not just the difference between PAL and NTSC for video frames. It was also the Atari had a faster CPU clock rate. So I think it was running at 1.6 megahertz versus the 1 megahertz for the Commodore 64. So even in the US, the Commodore 64 was running slower by about a third. So you get more frame rates, more in the 4 or 5 on the Commodore, and more in the 6 and 7 range, because that was just CPU power to do the rendering, to redraw the screen. And then on top of that, there's we were using the vertical blank interval, which NTSC is every 60th. So call that a jiffy. I would count jiffies to do timing. And I don't think they did a conversion from the 60, for 1 second equals 60 ticks to 50. Maybe I was still counting 60 ticks, but maybe they were going at a slower frame because of the 50 hertz. So that might be the difference you got in terms of how long it would take for the knock to happen and things like that. So those are timed off of the vertical blank. So double hit. If you try it on a current modern day simulator, where the frame rate is really, really fast, then you can see how the game should have been. But then I don't know that it was ever anyone took it apart in a way where you could play with a fast frame rate and actually be able to fly it still.
Yes, exactly.
So let's since we're talking about the Commodore 64, let's jump to one of the hot topics. The game that started all of the scum revolution. Scum, yeah, because it's in Italian we say lo scum.
Scum. Yes.
So let's speak about Maniac Mansion for a little bit, if you want.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Sure.
what was your? How did you get involved in Maniac Mansion?
Well, I think I had just finished working on Labyrinth, which was really the first graphic adventure that we did at Lucas. It was, in a lot of ways, compared to Scum, it was kind of clunky. It was all hand-coded in 6502, but we did come up with the idea of doing something other than a text parser in that, where we had kind of this slot machine interface where you choose a verb and a object, and that piece, just having those two, you can see you have it on the screen, take log, you end up with a limited set of commands and limited set of objects. You know what the object is named. You don't have to try to guess what the programmer called it. And we just figured that the gameplay would be more about problem solving and less about trying to figure out what the programmer was thinking of. And that one part did make it over to Maniac Mansion. I don't really know, though, whether Ron got that idea from looking at Labyrinth, because he wasn't on that team. But when he came up with Scum, that was his core concept, that let's put the verbs up and let's put the objects, the inventory objects, either as text or objects on the screen, and do away with guessing the parser, which was what you had to do before, though, on Sierra's games. And so he had been working for about a year with Gary, first on the design of Maniac Mansion, and then on actually building Scum, building the engine. And he finally had it working to the point where you could compile code and get it to run, and had a couple of basic tools in there to do it, and came to me and said, and I think I was maybe in the process of doing proposals. I can't remember exactly what I was doing. It might have been helping with conversion, overseeing of Labyrinth at the time. And he said, hey, would you like to be the scripter on Maniac Mansion? And it probably take a month or two to do the whole game. and so I said, sure, sounds good. So I learned how to do it and loved writing that way as opposed to having coding in 6502, and ended up, I think, on the project for maybe 6 months, and ended up doing a lot of the scripting. maybe the wiring at most of the rooms. Ron did a lot of the cutscenes, but I did a bunch also. And I think he was more focused on finishing up the SCUM system and fixing the bugs. And I was really essentially playtesting his SCUM system at the same time I was coding. So that's kind of frustrating. If you ever try to code on a moving target, being new to SCUM, I would spend hours trying to figure out what my bug was, and realizing that it wasn't my bug, it was something that the system was doing wrong, and kind of giving him specific examples and showing him how to fix. So that probably made it take a lot longer initially to do it. The game was way more complex than I think he might have imagined, because of you had the option of choosing from among a bunch of characters, and you had to be able to win the game with no matter which combination you chose, and with different ways to win, but still that you essentially had a much bigger game, very complicated. So that was a lot of fun. It was great collaboration, working with Ron and Gary, and mostly pretty fun memories. I think maybe towards the end I was getting a little tired of working on it, and I think that was when I ended up deciding to do my own game, which was Zak McCracken, while he was completing Maniac Mansion, doing the final tuning and playtesting and debugging.
I have a question about the workload you had at that time. These days, the working conditions of game developers, it's a hot topic, because, for example, Rockstar for Red Dead Redemption 2, they did lots of crunch time. There was a lot of frustration because of the long work days. How was at the time your average day at Lucas in terms of workload and stuff?
It wasn't too bad. During that part, we were doing this at the ranch. Our offices were at Skywalker Ranch.
Okay.
So that was nice. For me, it was about 25-minute drive through back roads to get there. So I'm going through redwood forests and windy roads, and had to watch out for not reindeer, but for raccoon and deer on the road. And we get there, then drive through the ranch, maybe 5 minutes drive from the gate to our offices. And we were kind of in the far back of it. And so that was great. And they had lunch there. It was too far away to go out to lunch at a restaurant, so they'd have several places on the ranch where you could, restaurant style eating areas, usually cafeteria style, where you pick up the food that's prepared, but still really nice. And we usually get together as a group and eat and talk some more about the stuff and go back and work. Okay. I think I think it was like, I get there around 9 in the morning and finish around 6 or 7, probably 6. During crunch, that would be different. I'm guessing on that game, Ron probably had more crunch time than I did, since it was his. On Zak, I think it was normal hours through at least 80%, 90%, maybe the last month or two, it felt more crunch, where I was working longer and longer hours, and then I would go to lunch and bring back half of my lunch for dinner, put it in the refrigerator and take it out for food. Matthew Kane was scripting with me on Zak, so we'd often be there until 8 or 9, so I'd be driving back at dark. And I think maybe once or twice, as we were getting ready trying to do the Gold Masters and really get it out the door, it might have been all-nighters or staying there overnight a couple of times. I would sleep on a couch in my office, so that was, there was a shower, and it was, but I wanted to be home with my family. So I remember, and I might be remembering it differently than how it was, but my recollection was that while there was crunch, it was generally limited to a few weeks or a month towards the end. There were other projects at Lucas where I think the crunch was much longer, and it seems like it was more self-inflicted. It was never the management saying you have to stay here and do it. It was more people being, either not having a life outside of this, so they just as soon stay there and do it, or just their own enthusiasm about doing it, which doesn't mean that it's a good work habit to get into. But from what I heard from some of the other things, like from Rockstar, where you basically were told you had to do it, and that was the expectation, and that was never my experience. It was always, all right, let's do it. We're going to do it, and you knew it was finite. That it would be there for a while, and then you'd be done and go on to the next project. So I think generally it was like 45 to 50 hour weeks. That was kind of the expectation, I think, at ILM. So we kind of inherited that. Includes lunch in there. So, take walks around the ranch. Take a bike. They had bikes you could borrow and ride around, and take a break and give someone a tour. And visiting relatives.
Okay. So let's change subject, because we have a very fascinating topic. You've been recently fascinated by VR, but before speaking about modern VR, let's talk about Mirage.
Okay.
What is Mirage?
So I mentioned earlier that my dream was to find a way to do games in a way that really affected people and how they saw themselves in their emotional lives. And what I was envisioning in 1975 and 76 was essentially an interactive Disneyland. I wasn't thinking about home computers or arcades. I was thinking of a very immersive experience where you say, and Disneyland was the closest because that was the premier theme park. Where you go to the park, and instead of getting on a ride that would be the same each time you did it, that you'd have interactivity with the ride, you'd change it. So I was kind of imagining more like a simulator type of experience. Or later on, I started seeing things like this show up in fiction. There's a book series called Dream Park, and recommend that if you haven't read it. Stephen Barnes and Larry Niven wrote the first one. I think they both worked on the second one too. There might have been more after that, but the first two are give you an idea. This is before the term virtual reality was invented, so I didn't have the language to describe it, but that was essentially what I was thinking. It was something that was very immersive. And when I first started working at Lucas, I told Peter that, okay, yeah, I'm willing to do home computer games, but what I really want to do is this. And he says, yeah, well, that sounds great, but we're going to do home computer games for now. And when Steve Arnold, who is our second general manager, who came in a couple years in, when we kind of pivoted more towards production and away from research, and Steve came in to help create more of a production environment. He loved that. I mean, he had been involved with Jordi Weissman, who did the BattleTech stuff back earlier, and so he actually he totally understood what I was talking about. But he said the same thing. Yeah, okay, well, maybe we'll get to that at some point. Just hold on. For now, we're doing home computer games. And so in around 1990, Steve realized that the whole games group had been growing pretty fast. And so we were around 15 people when we moved to the ranch. 4 years later, we were now close to 60. And the space we were in wasn't set up for that. And we had to leave the ranch. We had to go, we were kicked off because we were too big. And we were expecting to grow even more. But we also were very top down. Essentially, everyone reported to him. And he wanted me to take a break. This is after Indiana Jones' Last Crusade. He wanted me to take a break and come on as the, say, director of operations instead of being game designer, and help by hiring additional people to head up each of the departments. So maybe get a head of the art department, get a head of the tech support department or quality QA department, head of the customer support. And he wanted me to manage the programmers and the designers. And so that's kind of, and he knew that was not what I wanted to be doing, especially. So he kind of held this carrot out. He said, if you do that for a year, you can hire someone to replace you. And then we're going to do a location-based entertainment project, which was what I wanted to do. Location-based entertainment or LBE is the term we were using for out-of-the-home immersive computer experiences. And that's still being used as a term. So I did it, and he was true to his word. And so at the end of my year term of doing that, we created a joint venture with Hughes Training or Hughes Simulation. I'm not sure which is the proper term for it, but that was the company one of the companies that was involved in building professional flight simulators that were used by the airlines and by the military. And these are the really big ones on motion platforms with exact correspondence of controls to what you would have in a real flight, a real airplane, whatever kind it was. And you could actually get enough experience flying it so that you could totally transfer over to flying a real plane. Of course, we didn't want to do that. We wanted a game. So what you're seeing on the video there is, I just posted this for the first time yesterday. This made it accessible today.
So this is a world first. This is a world premiere of this video.
Premiere, yes. Whoa. So this is the Mirage Pod. It's huge. You can see there's a door. I think we're looking at the door. I know I'm off from what I'm seeing to what's being live, but there's a door with a vertical handle there that gives you a sense of the scale. So that was, I think that maybe it was 10 or 12 feet tall. The space inside was maybe 8 feet in diameter.
Look at this.
It's amazing.
And there were 2 seats for two players. One was the pilot and one was the could be the shooter or however you wanted to do it. You ended up with that's an Amiga right there in the middle, Amiga heads down display. That's what we used to kind of do a top-down map to show you where you were, and also various controls like speed and fuel level and things like that. And out the window is so on top of it there were like these lumps. Those are video projectors. There's 3 video projectors on the top. They're shining at a screen, very wide screen, and that kind of, so it's a rear projection, and then in front of you is a big mirror that's curved, concave. So it's called a collimating mirror. Okay. You got about 120 degree field of view, so your entire periphery is pretty much included. Because you're looking at a curved mirror, you're focusing maybe at 100 feet out instead of at 5 feet, which is where the mirror was. So when you're looking there, you feel like you're in this vast space. There's a launch sequence, which is very similar to what I stole that from Rescue.
Yeah.
And in fact, the game was called. I did, I think, 3 or 4 design docs, and the one we ended up doing was the one that was based on Star Wars. So I finally got to do a Star Wars game that no one got to play except for like a dozen people. So you're flying into this planet called Vernost, and it has this really strange pink fluid on the planet, which we were calling it like a liquid force. It had this ability to supercharge your plane, your ship, if you sucked it up and used it. Or it was also very valuable. It was healing. You could use it for the war. So you're essentially going there and mining it. You're sucking it up. you'll see these pink pools around there. There are, of course, there's TIE fighters and
Of course.
enemy ships in there that you have to. Boy, they want it also. There's other X-wings. The idea would be there'd be 8 players, 4 and 4, for X and for TIE. And
Wow.
see there, you can see there's a seam there because they have 3 projectors. There's a place where the projectors overlap, so it's not perfect, but they kind of blend the soft focus across them. The computers, we were using a professional flight simulator image generator. It was the Evans and Sutherland ESIG 2000, which I think was like $1 million flight simulator at the time. But it could do transparency. It could do all these things you couldn't do on PCs at the time. This is, I think, 1990 to 92. There weren't really no graphics cards yet, other than like the Hercules graphics card or I think CGA, VGA. I think your top was a VGA card.
Yes.
And there were no GPUs really. So here we had fog effects, we had anti-aliasing, we had full color spectrum, we had animated textures, and you're basically flying around and fighting and collecting the Sela and then leaving. It was supposed to be a 5 or 10 minute mission, but since we weren't doing it for real, I could be in there for like an hour playing this, and it was just awesome. It was difficult for me at first to tell them what I wanted in terms of flight dynamics. And I kind of wanted something that was similar to Rescue, where you just basically have a single stick. You go forward, you can go fast, you can go slow, but you're just flying around easily. And I wanted to go really, really fast. And they kept on trying to simulate to real physics, to real reality. And I said, that's not going to be fun in a game. So we had to go way, maybe an order of magnitude faster than you would in real life. And as far as acceleration and deceleration and how turning radius and things like that. So it felt more like a game.
So
And
this
that
is
was
incredible.
I'm speechless. It's way ahead. It's like playing a video game.
Well, you were basically working with future technology at the time. You were working in the future.
We were working with state-of-the-art, high-end computing systems at the time, but doing games instead of real simulators, which I don't know if anyone else had been doing at that point. So the downside, because we were using those really high-end computers, was that it was really expensive, and with the idea of doing an 8-pod grouping of these. Was probably in the $8 million range, $8 to $10 million in 1992 dollars, and it was just too expensive for any theme park to purchase. Partly also because I think the through rate. I mean, you're in there for like 5 or 10 minutes, and you only have say 16 players at a time. If you had a big park, you'd have to have multiple groupings of these, and that increases it even more. So at around 92, Steve Arnold, who was like I mentioned, he was the huge proponent of this whole area. He ended up leaving LucasArts and going up to work for Bill Gates. And he was probably the last person there who was high up in management. He's a VP at Lucasfilm to really push for it. So without him there, when they started saying, well, this is kind of expensive, should we really be doing this? But there was no one who could champion it at a high level. And they decided to close down our group, a small group of maybe half a dozen people. And Hughes took it over. And they tried to, for another several years, maybe 3 years, to sell it, refine it and sell it. And they never could get a buyer for it. And so it was closed down. There was one public viewing at the IAAPA conference in 1992. IAAPA is the International Attractions and Amusement Park Association, I think. It's really the equivalent of, say, of a GDC, but for everything from roller coaster rides to popcorn to plush toys, everything you'd have at a carnival or a theme park, and the whole gamut, everything in between. And so it was shown there, and I think it got great reviews. People loved it, and it just didn't go anywhere. So fortunately, Rob Walser, who is the Hughes project lead, had just found this video a couple of years ago, put it on Facebook, and I grabbed it from his account and just posted to YouTube with his permission. And
thank you to you, and thank to him.
So it's not public. You can share the URL in your feed.
Yes.
And I'll make it public today after this talk.
Nice. After the show, we will just publish the URL. So is the machine still somewhere and operational?
I don't think so. I don't think anyone who worked on it is still there, since this is 25 years ago. And the tech has come a long way. You could do everything we see here easily on, and way better on any of the current graphic cards. The one thing you couldn't do at home would be the mirror and the projectors. You might be able to find other ways to do it. Of course, you could do it in VR. And one other way to do it, rather than putting two people in it, one of the things that made it very expensive was the mirror, because you had to have the mirror big enough so that two people, there's a very small, what does it call it? Optimal seating position or head position. So you don't get, if you're out of the range by half a foot, you can start getting motion sick because of the difference in focus on your two eyes. So you had to make the mirror big enough so that area was large enough for two people sitting side by side to fall within that optimal zone. For the mirror, I think they used Mylar that was then suctioned via vacuum into a specific shape. Does that make sense? So it wasn't a physical glass mirror. I think it was actually Mylar. But even that was expensive. It wasn't on a motion base. That would have made it even bigger, because this was such a big thing. So now you could probably do a lot of this with VR pretty easily if you wanted to. And when I went to my first IAPA in 25 years last month in Orlando, and it's gotten way bigger. There were like 80 booths that had a VR aspect to them. Whoa. And so this is, you see people on physical roller coasters with people wearing VR helmets, where you're actually doing this, or motion-based rides with VR helmets, and people with backpacks and VR helmets walking around a space for like arena-style VR games. And I'm sure this is where things are going to go as the technology gets lighter and better. Be a lot more of that at location-based. And while I was there, there's a company. There are two companies doing this that I know of so far. There's The Void, which I think may have a location in London, but I think the rest are in the US. And there's another company that just opened a space in Orlando called Nomadic. And both of them are doing VR in physical spaces where objects in the physical space match objects that you see in VR. So if you see a door in VR and you walk up to it and reach for the handle, there's a handle there physically. So you open it, you can see the door open, it's door frame, if there's a railing, you can reach out and there's a railing there. And very fast, very, very quickly, you begin to trust what you're seeing, which isn't true in normal VR. In normal VR, you have to teach yourself that what you're seeing isn't really there. But in these experiences, everything you see actually is there, at least the physical parts near you. And you your brain does a little flip and you start believing the other things that are out there shooting at you are real too. So it's a very cool experience. You should definitely try it out if you have a chance. I think The Void just launched a Wreck-It Ralph themed VR experience. They also had a Star Wars one which I got to do a couple times. The Nomadic one in Orlando just opened its doors like a few days ago, and they have a zombie one based on Arizona Sunshine, and they're both very cool. I mean, and this is something you can't do at home, and it's worth going out to experience it.
Did you ever think in the past about this kind of matching between the physical space and the virtual reality? Because even in the 90s, it was much about cyberspace and yes, the idea of a visor and 3D, but not with this physical matching. Did you ever think about that?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, if you read the Dream Park novels, that's pretty much what they talk about. What they're kind of going. They aren't doing VR helmets. They're doing more like holographic special effects, but you're actually moving through a physical reality, a physical space that's been set up to look like whatever it's supposed to look like, and you see all these different effects happening. But I don't think they have you wearing any headgear, so that's off in the future. At some point, I think that's probably the way it's going to go. Maybe you have a physical space and AR integrated experience. That's something else I'd love to see or love to do, like going to the Harry Potter, the Wizarding World of Harry Potter in Orlando, or in Los Angeles at Universal Studios, and wearing an AR headset and interacting with real magic, with ghosts and dementors and other things that only you would see, but they're overlaid on the physical environment, which already is way better than you could ever do in CG. I mean, it's like being in the location because they're so real. The set design, it's not even set design, it's the theming of this space is perfect. So all you need to do is add the interact top of it.
I have another silly question because I'm curious. I saw in the Mirage footage, I saw a Japanese writing on a big battleship. Do you know what does it say?
No, I don't remember that from my time. So this video, I think, was shot a couple years after I stopped doing the project. I'm guessing maybe they had an interested Japanese client. Okay. And maybe they added new textures to show them what it would look like if this were in Japan. That's a guess. I don't know.
Okay.
Because clearly, either that or the writing that you saw was Star Wars, using the Star Wars fonts in text, which does not use English. So if you look at Star Wars movies, usually the text you see on devices is a made-up language. Maybe they use that. So I didn't remember looking to see if it was very Japanese or if it was Star Warsies.
Okay, thank you.
So, is it? Did you actually end up doing a real amusement park in the end in Japan?
Oh yeah. So a friend of mine, Jonathan Ackley, who was a game designer at LucasArts shortly after I left. I think he worked on, is it Monkey Island 3 or 4, one of those two. And he ended up going to Disney and getting a job at Disney Imagineering, which is the R&D group within Disney that comes up with all the tech to do the crazy stuff at theme parks. And being a game designer, he got them to consider doing interactivity in their parks. And he started with an overlay game as a test at Epcot in Orlando. And this would have been maybe 12 years ago, using Kim Possible, which is a Disney cartoon. And where you, at the time, this is before smartphones, so I think they were just using phones with video displays, and you could walk up to different areas. It's kind of like an adventure style overlay where you'd get instructions through your phone about where you should go next. You find this location. There'd be some interactivity with a storefront or with a kiosk or something. You might see an Eiffel Tower in a store. You push a button on your phone and a little antenna pops up at the Eiffel Tower physically, which then sends you a message to your phone, theoretically, and like that. So they loved it. They loved the test that he did. and they got really enthusiastic and said, okay, let's do these overlay games at all the theme parks. And so Jonathan called me up and said, would you and Annie like to design some overlay games for Hong Kong Disneyland and Tokyo Disney Sea? And so I said, yeah. So we got to go to Hong Kong, and we did 5 overlay games designs for Hong Kong Disneyland, which ended up, we polished the designs. They ended up with art and stories and storyboard stuff, but it didn't go further than that. I think they decided it was too expensive. I think Disney does, I don't know if Disney owns the Hong Kong one or not. I think it might be a license thing. So they didn't have control in the same way. And we did one at a location at at Tokyo Disney Sea, which is a theme park that doesn't have an analogous version elsewhere. And I see in the video, this is the area called the Fortress, and I heard that the people who designed this loved the game Myst, and so there's a real kind of the period is supposed to be kind of the Renaissance period, so 1600s maybe, 15 to 1600s. All the style was like that, but even though it was gorgeous, there really wasn't a lot to do. So they wanted this overlay game. So we came up with a design which was fairly different than what they ended up with. Ours was using more technical stuff, and Jonathan took our design and made it less technical, so it was really a paper map thing instead of using a cell phone. And it's a treasure hunt. You are given instructions to go to different locations to find, which object matches this picture you see on the map, and based on which object, the map tells you to go to this location, go to location G, and you do that like 4 or 5 times and end up with a final thing at the very end. And there's a whole story. Leonardo da Vinci is your host. That was a video of him there. And so he talks to you in the very beginning, in the very end of the experience, and the rest is just kind of fun. So you get to explore the whole space. I think they have 3 or 4 different maps for different adventures, and I don't think they share locations except maybe the beginning and end. Then once you win, you put your map on this big stamp thing and push down, and it does an emboss stamp over the white area that you saw on the map. And I finally got to play it when I was in Japan in last May, I guess it was, okay. May and June. And Jonathan gave me the translation, because everything's in Japanese, all the text and everything. So he gave me the translation, and I was able to go through one of the paths. It took me about an hour. Got a lot of exercise because there's a whole lot of staircases going up and down, and often would end up in a dead end because the maps are not perfectly clear how to get from one place to the other. There's a pirate ship. There's some really cool things to see there, but without the map, it wasn't as fun. So I thought the game really worked. So the game's been up for at least 10 or 12 years, 11 years, and I'm happy I finally got to say that I contributed to a theme park area of entertainment. It's very neat.
Because it's basically where you wanted to start,
and
when you eventually ended.
Yeah. So hopefully it didn't end. I hope this will be something I get to do in the future at some point, or at least if I don't get to design, at least I get to experience it. And I know that next year, in both Los Angeles and in Orlando, the Star Wars area is opening up at Disney, and hope to go back to see that. I did go to when I was at IAAPA in Orlando. I experienced the Avatar adventure or experience, and that was a fairly new thing that they did. That was great. I mean, it felt really tight great theming. The lines were long. It was like 2 to 3 hours. I did it twice. One was 2, the other was 3. So I spent a lot of time in the line on Twitter, on my mobile phone. A lot better than last time. At least I had my phone. I know this will come as the tech gets better. This is, the thing there was very non-techy, but I think by adding AR as a component, I think you could do some really fun stuff. AR doesn't really work well outdoors, at least with the headset. We say Magic Leap doesn't work very well outdoors yet. You need to be able to bring in the whole space that you're walking through. So if it's a huge space rather than just your room. So we have a ways to go.
Can I go a lot back, because we talked about some franchises, some IPs you touched in your life as a designer. There is one we just touched very lightly, but it's Labyrinth, and I'm 44, so Labyrinth struck me in my face when I was a kid. It was huge. There was the puppets from Jim Henson. There was Lucas. It was everything I loved. All together, David Bowie. All together was very big. But maybe I'm wrong. But it was a little bit different for you, because the movie was not out when you started working, developing the game. How did you approach that? Because it's harder.
Yeah, well, it was similar to Indy when we did Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Both cases, we had the script, we had production stills like slides. We had in Labyrinth, we had some footage showing some of the scenes with the Muppets, maybe without the special effects in yet, but at least we can get a sense of what they were going to look like. And so we had that part, and I think they offered it to us as a test, because this was, during the 80s, we were not allowed to do any Star Wars-based titles, because all the licenses had been sold to other companies as exclusives. So I'm thinking this might have been a test on a film that they didn't care as much about as they would at Star Wars, to see whether we screwed it up. Okay. I guess they liked it because they let us do Indy, which was a bigger, a bigger moneymaker for them than Labyrinth. So we said yeah, and a team of us, early on in the project, after we read the script, we flew to London and spent a week brainstorming with Douglas Adams.
Adams.
Yeah, Hitchhiker's Guide, Douglas Adams, and. Because he was good friends with Jim Henson, and he knew other people, from the production group. So he offered to spend time with us, brainstorming. So some of the crazier ideas probably came from him. There's a word he really liked called adumbrate, which I had never heard of before, and that was directly his. And he had an idea about being inspired by the Wizard of Oz movie, where in the Wizard of Oz, when you start the movie, it's in black and white, and then when you get to the magical place, to Oz, everything's in color. And he said, okay, well, what if we started as a text adventure, and then once you get into the movie, into the world of the labyrinth, then everything becomes a graphic adventure. And so that made it through, and we figured, okay, this would be kind of a without putting people into a graphic adventure right away, if they're used to text adventures, they'll get used to the interface of the slot machine interface, which is the same on both, and then go from there to so the first mini adventure, very short adventure, is to get into the movie theater with the ticket and pick up your movie camera and go inside the screen, and David Bowie tells you to that you've been chosen, that he knows everything about you, that you are now stuck in the labyrinth. You have 13 hours in order to complete it.
Wow.
Otherwise you're doomed. So Charlie was the technical lead, Charlie Kellner, and he took his cell animation system that he had done in Rescue and refined in the Eidolon, which was his game, and then added a scaling graphics feature. I think he had that in the Eidolon also. And we worked on the game. It was a strange. I mean, it was up to me to take all the brainstorming ideas and kind of gel them into a working game design. And Charlie did most of the coding, and I did figure. I was able to do some of the coding myself at some point, but probably was never that strong in assembly, so it was more painful. Which is why doing Maniac Mansion was so much more fun.
So, what about how was it like to interact with Steven Spielberg while working on Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade?
Well, yeah, we didn't interact with him too much. We had this was another project that was tied to the film, so we had a deadline. The movie was coming out, I think, in 6 months. That was not real likely we could complete the game in 6 months. So we had three of us, three senior designers from Lucas were put on the project. So that was myself, Ron Gilbert, and Noah Faustine all worked together on this, and we kind of split up different parts of the game. And we had a bunch of questions, so we had a meeting with Steven and George early on before the game started, early in the design process. I asked them a bunch of questions about what the scope was, how far could we go, how much we had to stick to the movie, could we go to locations that weren't in the movie, could we kill Indy if we wanted to? And Steven said, "Yeah, kill him. I don't care. It's fine." And he was coming up with, "Hey, he could do this whole thing in South America and do this." And he started adding all these different ideas and elements. And we said, "No, wait. It's going to be hard enough to do it within the location of the film, but we just want to see if we can invent new things." So we had a pretty much free reign. We already felt that we had to stick as close to the character of Indy as we could, but we also often got a little more tongue-in-cheek than the movie did. That was our, the Lucasfilm Games sense of humor that we put in. There's a story that I've told at the end, for the end of the movie, the end of the game. Ron sent me some dialogue and interaction that he wanted me to go ahead and implement for the end game sequence once you get the Grail. And I put it in, and then Noah gave me a whole set for the same sequence, his own dialogue. And I said, okay, thanks. And then I was going to throw out Ron's and put his in. And Ron said, no, well, Ron's was very irreverent and very, very jokey. and I thought it was placeholder. And he said, no, it's not placeholder. That's how I want it to be. And Noah was hurt because he'd just done this work on it too. So I came up with, we were kind of going back and forth about which version we should use. And I suggested, well, let's use them both. I'll use a random number generator, and you get to get one or the other based on the random number generator. So they both watched me code the generator to make sure that it was fair, and that's how the game shipped with both of them. So you might get the more tongue-in-cheek version or the more serious one.
Crazy.
This is amazing.
And but that was also it was a fun project. I think we were maybe a couple months late, but it wasn't as critical because we knew that the movie would have legs, and be around for a long time. And there are areas we had to cut, but I think overall it was just really it was another really fun project. And as it turned out, that was my last game there. So I have good memories, and I think I mentioned that next year is the 30th anniversary of this game. It came out in 1989. So here we are coming up to 2019, 30 years later. We're hoping to be invited to some game conferences next year to talk about it and like do kind of a.
We are actually. I would really like for them to be invited to Games Week in Milano. It would be perfect.
Yes.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so.
We work for that.
Fingers
for sure.
crossed.
Yes.
Yeah. So that we're up for more travel. I mean, I had such a great time in Italy earlier this year in September. When we spoke at the Cervignano Film Festival on
Yes.
the 30th anniversary of Zack McCracken, and met some really, really great people, and felt so welcome there that both Annie and I just fell in love with the country and would love to go back. So
You are very, very, very welcome in Italy. Only next time you will have to come to Milano so you can sample my cooking.
yes, we hit Milan on the way to Venice. Venice was fogged in, and we had to land in Milan for like a couple hours while they were waiting for the fog to clear. But that's all I got to see. So all I saw of Milan was through the open door of the airplane of the runway.
Yeah,
And
that
also-
sounds like Milano. Yeah.
Yeah. But then flying from between the two, we saw some really, really beautiful landscapes. Hills with villages nestled in the hills and lakes, and that I'd love to see what that looks like on the ground also. So, and I got to see some of the locations in Venice too, from Indy, which was really fun. I think I took a picture of myself, or was it Zach? I think Zach McCracken Zach Phoenix McCracken. Hi there. Yeah, took a picture of me standing in front of the church.
Yes. At last, yes.
So, David, I thank you so much for doing this, and I hope we will be able to do this again. And really, thank you for your time. Thank you everybody who's been here with us today. We are usually an Italian retro gaming channel, but sometimes we will do stuff like this in English. So even if you're not from Italy, follow us. Our chat is very welcoming to English speaking and actually every kind of language. So welcome. Thank you for being with us. It's been a very special night to me. Thank you so much, David, and say hello to Annie from me.
You're welcome. And Annie says hi to everyone who's there from Italy who are friends. Hi to you guys. And I see I know there's a chat going alongside this. I'll go through and try to read and answer questions if it's still open.
Yes.
If I don't get, if there is a question someone asked that I didn't get to, then you can just message me on Twitter. Send it to me on Twitter, and I'll do it. So it's at David B. Fox.
Nice.
Yes,
Happy to
there was a
answer.
ton of questions, but too many. So
Yeah,
yes.
there were a ton of questions, but we just couldn't keep up. So we just I skimmed through the questions, but there's definitely a lot of love in that chat.
Okay.
So David,
Thank you.
thank you. We will now be raiding another channel since our stream is about to be over. David, thank you so much, and see you very soon. Hopefully in Italy, but maybe online as well.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank you very
Bye,
much.
David.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, so whoa.
Ah, it's amazing.
This was very, very intense and
Yes.
very special
No,
to
it's-
all of us. So really, thank you. Follow us. We do some really cool retro gaming stuff. As you can see, we are surrounded by arcade cabinets. And so, bye bye.
Yes.
Exa, please. Let's go with a raid. Raid whatever you want, whoever you want. And in the meantime, you would like to pick up the guitar?
No, I'm shocked.
You are shocked. Me too.
No, I'm really
Me
shocked.
too. Me too.
There are things about my life which were put on display, like Rescue on Fractalus. It was hearing that from him. It's like I'm just a fanboy in this moment, so I cannot even talk. Jesus.
Yeah, it was
it's-
it was very special.
Yes. In the end, I'm still a fanboy. It's impossible.
Yeah, it's right to be fanboys.
Yes.
And so, sorry for our Italian sounding English, but we had a blast. And let's go raiding Mike the Sandman, and let's go. Bye bye, everybody. Should be going. Let's see. Giusto in tempo.
Just in time.
We should be raiding.
Prego. Grazie a voi. Thank you all.
Ah, aspetta, no, non è ancora partito il raid.
No, it's
Exa Birichino.
No,
Grazie anche. Thanks to Exa, our friend in Switzerland right now,
Yes,
who oversaw everything from behind the
yes,
scenes.
from behind the jagged lines.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. Ooh.